Morning, and welcome to our sermon for this morning, October 18th, 2020, for St. Mark's and All Saints. For the past several weeks, our gospel readings has become an extended town hall meeting between Jesus and the religious leaders of Jerusalem. Like with the presidential town halls that we've watched on the news this past week, Jesus is being asked difficult questions. Some of the questions seem to be genuine attempts to understand what he is actually preaching. But there is also an undercurrent of trying to trick him into saying something that will get him into trouble. All of this has been framed in the context of Jesus having just tossed the tables of the money changers in the air and chased them and the sellers of animals for ritual sacrifice out of the temple. So far, all of the questions have come from the chief priests and the scribes, the leaders who made their living off the taxes paid to the temple, fees paid for rental of stalls for the money changers and animal sellers Jesus just chased out, and from the parts of the sacrificed animals that were not burned on the altar. And Jesus has answered each of their questions in a way that has made them look like fools, ending with the parable of the wedding feast and the implication that they, the leaders of the temple, were not worthy of God's kingdom because of their treatment of their own people, and that God was preparing to burn the city and tear down the temple because of what they had done. They had been humiliated in front of the crowd that they had gathered to embarrass Jesus. And reading between the lines of Matthew, they seem to sort of slink off the stage so that new combatants can step up. And so we have the Pharisees and the Herodians, two groups who would traditionally have represented very different socioeconomic and religious positions. The Pharisees, for the most part, were very much part of the people of Galilee and Judah. They were the precursors of today's rabbis. They were the sons of farmers and laborers, fishermen and craftsmen, but they had studied the law, the Torah, the 5 books of the Bible thoroughly, and had risen to prominence as religious leaders like Jesus. While in Judah, the temple was fairly close by and was very much the center of worship. For those in Galilee, worship in the time of Jesus was practiced more commonly in the temple, or in the synagogues, with the temple being a site of pilgrimage. The Pharisees governed and oversaw the synagogues, the reading of scriptures on Saturdays, and the keeping of ritual cleanliness throughout the year among the people. And while they are frequently shown as hypocrites and opponents of Jesus in the gospel and in other scriptural readings, Jesus and the Pharisees actually had very much in common, and some of Jesus's earliest followers would have seen him, if not quite as one of them, then certainly as an extension of them. So their inclusion as questions of Jesus in this temple town hall should be met with some skepticism. While it is possible that Jesus and the Pharisees would argue with one another, it seems more likely that this is a reflection of the disputes between the followers of the Pharisees and followers of Jesus 2 generations on during the time of Matthew. The other group that steps into the fray in this dispute, however, was very much at odds with the teaching of Jesus and of the Pharisees. The Herodians, as the name implies, were those who were followers and close associates of King Herod and his court. Now, I say King Herod because that is how we know him. But he was really a puppet ruler of Rome with the official title of Tetrarch of Galilee, in what is now northern Israel, and Perea, an area of modern Jordan just east of the Jordan River, between the Sea of Galilee in the north and the Dead Sea in the south. Herod had been raised Jewish, but the existence of his family amongst the 12 tribes was disputed at best. It was widely rumored that his father's family had converted just a few generations before from idol worshiping, and his mother was a Samaritan. Further, he had spent much of his youth and been educated in Rome amongst the Roman elite as the son of Herod the Great. So his Jewish identity was very much in question amongst the people of Galilee and Perea. But as the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, Herod's job was to enforce Roman law, keep money and goods pouring into Rome, put down rebellions, and make sure that the Roman trade routes stayed open. And as long as Herod, or any other puppet ruler, could do this, Rome was happy to keep an ostensibly native ruler in charge of a subject state rather than reverting to direct Roman rule. And there was a general sense in Galilee and Perea that it was better to have a puppet not quite genuinely Jewish leader in charge, rather than be under the direct control of Rome. In Jerusalem, where this dispute is set, Herod would have had no formal power. Instead, the puppet state of his half-brother had become so corrupt that the people had demanded direct Roman control, and Pontius Pilate had been appointed governor. On high holy days, however, as a gesture to keep the peace in Galilee and Perea, Herod would make a big show of going down to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices at the temple in accordance with Jewish law. So to summarize, we have Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem being confronted by two groups who had come down, like him, from Galilee for the feast of Passover to offer ritual sacrifices at the temple. The Pharisees with sincerity, the Herodians as a show of false piety. Now, the question these two groups ask is whether it is lawful to pay the tax that Rome has levied on the people, a regressive tax of 1 denarius, or 1 day's wages for a day laborer, on each man, woman, and child over the age of 12 and under the age of 65, slave or free. For the poor, this tax meant going without food and other necessities, but for the wealthier, it was a trivial amount. If Jesus were to answer that they needed to be good subjects of the empire and pay the tax, he would lose all credibility amongst the common people who were forced to sacrifice their basic needs to pay the tax, and where the tax served as a reminder of their subjugation to the idol-worshipping, immoral Roman Empire. If Jesus were to answer that they should not pay the tax, he could be arrested on the spot, charged with sedition against the empire, and both he and his followers would be subject to execution. Either way, this would be the issue that would define Jesus' ministry and his memory. But instead, Jesus turns the question on its head by asking for an example of the coin with which the tax is paid. When the coin is quickly produced, he uses it to demonstrate the hypocrisy of the question. The image of idols was forbidden to the Jewish people. But here in the temple, the holiest place in the world, a Roman coin is produced without a second thought. And on that coin, not only is there the image of the Roman emperor, but there is also an inscription declaring that emperor as the Son of God and High Priest. All of the people, no matter their genuine piety, had been compromised by the Roman occupation. And Jesus has called them out for the hypocrisy of the question, simply by examining the coin. But then he does something else. He makes this declaration: "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." No one had asked the question about God. The question was what was owed to the emperor. And the apparent answer is that the emperor is owed that which bears his image. In other words, pay the tax. But if you need to pay the coin to the emperor because the coin bears the image of the emperor, then what is owed to God is what bears God's image. We owe ourselves, our lives to God, because each and every one of us bears the image of God. Now, this gospel is often used to justify compromising oneself and one's values to the needs of the state, to the need to pay taxes, to volunteering for the military, and to otherwise serve the government, no matter how corrupt and immoral that government may be, because Jesus justified paying taxes to the unjust Roman emperor. But in fact, the meaning is the opposite. Jesus is saying, throw back at the Roman Empire these shiny bits of useless metal with their idolatrous imagery and blasphemous inscriptions, and live your lives free from the influences of the Roman Empire. Practice rebellion against the evils of the world by creating an alternative, by building the kingdom, by practicing justice, by living righteously, by worshiping the one God alone, and by loving one's neighbor as oneself. Choose God, choose love, choose freedom. Amen.